Welcome back, classical music lovers, to our podcast Classical Discoveries. Again, we have a very interesting theme today about this composer. Hi Jens, I love Norway, I love the countryside, I love the loneliness of the country is amazing. I don't like the prices for beer.
Or anything else. For that
or anything, yeah, it's very expensive. But honestly, I only know from Christian Sinding this piece we just heard here in the introduction. I had to practice it when I was young, you know.
The famous Rustle of Spring.
The Rustle of Spring. But as other composers which have been nearly forgotten, he also wrote many other things we don't know anymore today. No?
He's a bit of a one-hit wonder, not the only one.
Okay.
You mentioned he's Norwegian, but of course Norway at the time didn't quite yet have the identity of a country, or was just beginning to do so. He was born in 1856, and like so many composers from the north, all of them almost, he went to Leipzig to study.
But the only composer, sorry to interrupt you, the only composer we really know is Edvard Grieg. Was he before or also in the same time? Or?
I think Grieg is about the same age, maybe a little bit older.
Okay.
I think Sinding actually played in the orchestra under Grieg when he was in Oslo,
really?
Or Christiana as it was called back then,
uh-huh.
for a short time.
Okay.
And Grieg also later on commented quite positively on the first symphony of Sinding's when he heard it, I think, in Paris.
Okay.
Which kind of brings us to the topic, which is the symphonies specifically.
Specifically the symphonies, because we just can release now a complete recording of his symphonies number 1 to 4. There were not more, but they're really fascinating music. And therefore I have been on the recording sessions up in Norrköping, and I could bring back some interesting short movie with conductor Karl-Heinz Steffens.
Der Sinding, der ist ja geboren in mir, als Robert Schumann gestorben ist. Also als der Wagner 1876 seinen Ring zum ersten Mal gemacht hat, war der Sinding ja schon ein richtig erwachsener Mann. Ja? Und er war in Deutschland. Wenn ein Komponist was werden wollte, musste er nach Deutschland gehen, in dieser Zeit. Und da musste er, die meisten sind nach Leipzig gegangen, haben da studiert. Also auch Sibelius war in Leipzig. Der Sinding hat ja fast sein ganzes Leben in Deutschland gelebt. Der war ja später, ging er dann als alter Mann irgendwie als Nationalheld so ein bisschen nach Norwegen zurück, aber der war im Prinzip immer ein deutscher, in Anführungsstrichen, deutscher Komponist. Die erste Symphonie, die ist ja in einer Zeit geschrieben, als wirklich dieser spätromantische Stil von Wagner kommend zu Richard Strauss gehend authentisch war. Und dann baut er das immer weiter auf, dann kommt der Einfluss von Strauss immer mehr. Dann bläht sich sozusagen der romantische Apparat, der Orchesterapparat immer mehr auf. Ich glaube, viele dieser Spätromantiker, die so irgendwie ins 20. Jahrhundert rübergekommen sind, außer Sibelius aus Finnland, sind die alle irgendwie so ein bisschen in Vergessenheit geraten.
Yeah, I mean, this is really bombastic music. But why had the Norwegian composer that time had to move to Germany to do this?
Well, that's where the infrastructure was. That's where the orchestras were. And there were only so many composers that had a chance in Norway, because it was basically Oslo or Christiania. Germany and Leipzig in particular was the epicenter of classical music. The conservatory that Mendelssohn founded, where Schumann had worked, and you can hear that it's very almost more Mendelssohnian in most of the excerpts, and then you can hear a little bit of Wagner, a little bit of Strauss. I hear less of it than other people and even contemporaries claimed that they heard. But it's really essentially German music. He's a German symphonist who happened to have been from Norway.
Do you know how long he stayed there in Germany? Did he ever go back then to Norway? Or
Most of his life, I think.
Okay.
He didn't do well in school, and he got kicked out of the elite music school or art school in Oslo, and then he was supposed to become a cobbler, because his father had died. His grandfather wanted him to do a proper job. Obviously, he wasn't cut out for the arts like his two brothers, who became a sculptor and a painter respectively. And then when he was 18, he went to Leipzig anyway, and he studied under Jarosson, Solomon Jarosson, who gave him a pretty bad review at the year's end review. He said that he was modestly talented for composition or music, if that. The first symphony gave him some notice, and then he got a stipend, or just before he got a stipend from the Norwegian state to support artists. So he could actually focus on just composing.
I have a short excerpt from the first symphony, which really shows his youth energy. It sounds like a bit to conquer the world, you know. So, but honestly, I always am questioning myself why a composer like Grieg became and stayed so famous, and why we have such amazing music of a composer here like Sinding, and really no one never ever noticed really something from it.
I mean, a lot of it is luck, but there's also, does a composer give the people something that really stands out? And Grieg, of course, channeled Norwegian nationalism and crafted a whole new language out of it. He had learned all the same things, but then he took all those Norwegian influences and turned it into very appreciable music, but that we can hear, even if we don't know a whole lot about Scandinavian music otherwise, to be Norwegian, or what we think is Norwegian. Mm-hmm. And Sinding didn't have that. His style is rather interchangeable. Yeah. And not every musician was cut out to forge a new path by incorporating national sounds into their music. Okay. I mean, Grieg was among the first ones to do so. And we only have, the Bartoks and Saigun's and Eneshkus later who turned that into a cottage industry almost.
I just realized the last symphony now, it might be a bit more famous. It's called Frost and Spring, But there is a huge difference, because the fourth symphony is written in 1936 and the third symphony in 1919. So there's a long period.
Well, first of all, I think more famous is rather than overstatement. Less unfamous, perhaps?
Less unfamous, okay.
I don't think the gap is quite as long as it seems. It was premiered in 1936. I think he started on sketches as early as 1920, which would have been almost immediately after the Third Symphony.
Okay.
So, and he worked on it for a longer time, had more of a gestation period, if you will. But I don't think they're that far apart after all.
Okay. But in this symphony, this is why I'm questioning on this. As Stefan said, also in the video, you can hear the piano. The piano gives a fantastic color. But this really gives an amazing color with the harp and with the piano, something new in a symphony.
I'm not sure how new it was by 1936 when it got premiered. And if you look at the list of symphonies that were composed around 1917, 1918, 1919, he's already old-fashioned. Before the war, he was, or in the 1880s with his first symphony, he was essentially right on the money with his tastes, and by the second symphony, the audiences had already moved on. Some of them anyway, not everyone, surely. I'm sure it was pretty popular when people went to the concert and heard it. And the second symphony in particular was premiered by Weingartner.
Ah, really? Okay.
And the third symphony was premiered by Nikisch and the Gewandhaus Orchestra. And the third symphony was really well regarded. That was 1919, so that was right after the war. And I should imagine that for people after the war, that kind of a music was actually a reprieve. It was good to hear something that was untroubled. And also the premiere, because there was a strike with the stagehands, had to take place in complete darkness. And I can only imagine that must have helped immensely, because when I hear a concert in darkness, usually because it's some gimmick, the listening becomes much more intense and you feel much more involved.
That's a fantastic idea. I think we should really switch down the lights in all concerts, stay in the dark, especially when energy is so expensive in our days.
Well, it's what Wagner wanted.
So coming back to Sinding now, Sinding went sometime, I think when he was very old, he went back then to Norway and became a hero suddenly.
I'm not sure how much of a hero he was, because during the 1930s he made some comments about Germany that did not go down too well in Norway. And he was probably senile at the time. And so there was a bit of a scandal, I hear. But he got a nice retirement, and he got to live out his last days in a flat in an apartment on the grounds of the castle that was given to him, sort of like Bruckner, actually.
Oh yeah, okay.
And then he died during the Second World War in 1941.
Okay. But what else? I mean, you are the researcher. What else is interesting to hear from Sinding besides his symphonies?
Well, I have not all of my CDs here of Sinding. The violin concertos, I think.
Okay.
Everything that he was a violinist, and that was the instrument he was best at. And I think you can hear that. And this is with Frank Behrmann and Andrei Bilov, the three concertos. There's a beautiful recording coupled with the Sibelius of one of the concertos of Sinding's with Henning Kragerud on Naxos, and the complete chamber music for violin and piano. And that's really very pretty. And there's a bit more chamber music, and then of course his main work, except for the Rustles of Spring.
There is a main work?
Well, his longest anyway.
His longest main work.
The Holy Mountain, his opera.
Okay. The Holy Mountain. Is it an opera or a oratorio?
It's a full-blown opera.
It's a full-blown opera. Okay.
That is by far his most Wagnerian work.
Really? Okay.
There you can really hear it. And it's a wonderful recording with Heinz Fricke.
Oh, Heinz Fricke.
The conductor who conducted the first opera I ever attended.
Okay.
And but other than that, I think other than the symphonies, of course, it's really worth listening to those smaller violin pieces of his.
Okay.
They're absolutely charming.
So the conclusion is, ladies and gentlemen, we have a fantastic Norwegian composer with a long German tradition, and we should talk about in another podcast maybe sometimes about all these other. There are so many of unknown Norwegian or Scandinavian composers.
Absolutely, music of the north.
Music of the north, yeah. But for now, we are happy. Thank you very much that you watched our podcast. We will leave you with a short excerpt of the finale of his fourth symphony.